Welcome everyone to this Next Generation Internet workshop at Vinnova, and also special welcome to those of you watching us online. So we're webcasting this first hour, and people are following us online as well as the people being here in the room. My name is Johan Lindberg. I work here at the Swedish Innovation Agency, and I'm the host today. But I have two excellent visitors that will help me with most of the content. So we will first have a presentation about the EU perspective on the next generation internet from Ragnar Bergström at the European Commission. So we'll take it directly from the source, what this is all about. And after Ragnar has explained to us the details of this next generation internet initiative, Rebecca Steinert from RISE will also explain a bit and further on this particular call that we are focusing on the ICT24 call for intermediaries and third parties. Since this is a little bit a special call where we're not looking directly for the researchers, but rather for the intermediaries who will then be in contact with the real researchers. Then after an hour we will close down the webcast, and we will have a short coffee break, and we have an hour with sort of plenary discussion, questions and answers, going more into detail with those of you that are here today. But of course, during the presentations, if you have short questions about clarity of the content, etc., please raise them so that everyone understands. But if you ask questions, wait for the microphone so the people watching online also can follow what the question was about. Also, those of you following online, we have a Twitter hashtag there, Sweden NGI Workshop, SWENGIWS. And also, if you have questions during the webcast, you can also email me, so I will be following online if there are questions from the audience on the internet and that have questions. Send them to me, and I will raise them with the speakers. But with that, I will welcome Ragnar Bergström from the European Commission.
Thank you.
You're most welcome, and we're pleased to have you here and have you explaining what this initiative is about. So please, Ragnar, the floor is yours, and I will look up your presentation here.
Well, thank you. So while you put on my presentation, it's nice to be here, and I'm happy to see the audience here and also the people that are following on the web. So indeed, I work at the Commission in the unit that was created 2 years on this next generation, which is called Next Generation Internet. As you all know, Internet has changed and transformed the way we work, the way we live, the way we get informed, and the way we interact with each other. It has also changed the business models, and this not only in the ICT sector itself, but also in all other sectors. Let me, get this. But there are also, and the potential is of course enormous in this evolution to continue with the way we are living, the way we are learning new things, how we can get a better healthcare, how we get a better and safer mobility, how we get better inclusion overall, how we can maybe personalize public services, and the list goes on in this way. But there are also serious concerns and risks. We see abuse maybe of dominant positions, the user lock into certain services, the breaches of users' privacy and security. And it is a bit worrying that almost half of the internet users are restricting a little bit the way they use internet because they have security concerns. So we need to shape a better internet. We want to do something about this. And the Commission has already, in response to this, put in the last few years, quite a robust legal framework to some of these aspects. So we have indeed, as you know, the GDPR when it comes to data, how we're looking at free flow of data, the security of network and information services, the platforms and the platform's responsibilities, and also the safe electronic identity, and so on. So there are a number of these things we are trying to put in place, but there is a missing element in all this, and that is really the role of the technology leadership. How do we deal with this? We really play catch up when we are doing these things with how technology is developing so fast. And this is something we would like to change. As you know, there are a number of these technology trends that are going to continue to transform internet in the coming 10 to 15 years. And we want to be part of that. We want to ensure, of course, that we support these changes, that we support this groundbreaking research and innovation that is happening. And we need to help these new technologies to be implemented, but without disruption or without restrictions. We need to ensure that the policy concerns that we are having are taken into account, that they are built in from the start, and not that we add on legislation afterwards because it becomes necessary. So really considering privacy by design, security by design, and so on. And this also should allow us to reduce and minimize the necessary legislation that is then required, really to allow new businesses and the economy to develop quickly and nicely in a good way without having too much regulation around it. And this is really the NGI ambition overall. This is really what we think we need to focus on. So we think we need to act now in order to do something, and that's why we have launched this NGI vision, the NGI initiative that started 2 years ago. And a bit the vision is really that, as I said, as these technologies are developing, is really to ensure that such core values around trust and the resilience, this openness and inclusion, this sustainability, that all these elements are really taken into account already when the technologies are being prepared, developed, and implemented. And we see this really as a joint effort. As you can see here on this slide, we really consider that we need to defragment and connect and have an ecosystem of European actors which are broader than just the ICT experts. We need to engage new stakeholders. We want to engage the internet researchers that are not typically participating in the EU-funded programs. We need to reach out to them. We want them to be part of this community. We also want to link the long-term research with the applied research and with the policy and societal expectations. We want these core values, these European values that we have, as said, on openness and security and privacy, to really be part of these technological developments and how we see internet progressing. So we see this a bit like a European movement of the human internet, even as a political goal. So we think we need to unite all the stakeholders around this in a common goal, which is an internet of humans. So what we have done already now in the current framework program in Horizon 2020, we have for the last 3 years in the work programs 2018 to 2020 considered a number of topics which we think really should contribute, so which are really part of, in one way or the other, of the internet evolution. There's almost 300 million euros for these 3 years into the topics that you can see here on the screen. And this goes from artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, the global social sphere, but also topics which are important like the inclusiveness and the multilinguality. So these things are not so that we need to change each one of the area or reword them, and all these areas are really research areas in their own right. But we think we really need to consider how each one of them can contribute to this overall vision of how next generation internet evolves. And therefore we have also added this additional topic, which is the NGI, an Open Internet Initiative, which you see at the bottom, which we'll talk a little bit more about today. You can also see here that indeed what also impacts, of course, the next generation internet, or the internet how we see it, is 5G and cloud and big data and so on. So these are, of course, it all kind of interacts or should interlink. So this is, of course, a rather complex environment. If you just take a quick look on the kind of roadmap, this really shows how we consider NGI is here to stay, if I can say so. So we started with the study and some preparatory actions, And now we're really in this middle part here at the bottom, within Horizon 2020, where we have this work program around next generation internet, which operates as an umbrella of all those topics that I showed in the previous slide. So that's where we are operating today. We will talk more about. But just to illustrate to you that in the proposal the Commission has done for the next framework program, for the Horizon Europe, NGI is a priority area in the digital and industry cluster. And we see that as a big role that it has to play there. We really think that this human-centric view should guide work beyond the areas that we are now looking at. It should really look into, already from the hardware, when we see how 5G is developed and how the edge and fog computing, how blockchains are evolving. We think that in all these areas, from the kind of lower layers up to application layers, they need to have this in mind about how the human-centric element is important, and they should guide elements of this work. So this is how we see NGI as an important intervention area, also going into the next framework program. So if I can say a few words then on this cascade funding and the opportunities. Rebecca will say much more about this, but if I can already introduce a bit what we intend and expect with this, because I think this is in addition to what is going on, so this is kind of a complement to the ongoing research which is already happening in those areas, as I mentioned earlier, on artificial intelligence and IoT and so on. We really think that we need to attract these internet developers or internet researchers that are not in the program now. And that's why we have really launching this cascade, using this cascade funding with the subgranting. And in this slide you can really see the two parts. So the upper parts are these intermediaries, as Johan also referred to, that we are looking for. So we are looking for projects submitted to us at the Commission with consortia that really can run an ecosystem in a specific topic, that really have the leadership in that kind of research area or the links to it. And each one of these projects for each area should, there's put 7 million in from the Commission as funding, and 80% of this should be distributed to the subgrantees. And that's why we speak about these intermediaries. We need these consortia to act as an group together to really attract then the researchers that are going to do really the research and innovation activities. And we think that the procedures are to be set up by these consortia exactly on how they organize the calls, how they give support to these subgrantees, that, as we call them, these internet innovators that will be funded by them. So they need to attract the top teams and the top researchers in this specific topic. They have to monitor them, they have to mentor them and give them support and help them and build kind of a community around this. And the subgrantees, on the other side, then, that they will attract and that they will fund, there it should be easy and agile. This is the idea with these mechanisms, that we can use this rather than the more heavy traditional research activities which also are there, which also serves a purpose, where we have consortia being set up with thicker projects. So we need these subgrantees to be attracted here by being able to operate just as a single entity, as a single organization, as a single person, to have an easy access, a simple way of putting forward a proposal, and a quick way of being approved and evaluated. And then they can quickly then carry on this research and innovation work which they have proposed. And typically these subgrantees, these small entities, they should get 50 to 200,000 euros over a 9 to 12 month period. But this is then to be defined more specifically by each one of these intermediary projects. We have already, as you probably know, this year, had a first round, a call that we called for 3 topics, as you see here on the left side. So we have this privacy and trust enhancing technologies, where in the end we have actually selected 2 projects. We have the decentralized data governance, and we have the discovery and identification technologies. So these 3 areas, we now have selected the consortia, the intermediaries that are going to operate, and they have started to actually launch the open calls to attract internet innovators. Rebecca will provide a bit more details on each one of these, but this is just to show you that this has already started, and we are currently looking for the next 3 intermediary projects. So here we are looking again for the consortia that then a year from now will actually then do the open calls for the next group of innovators. So we are kind of launching this process of attracting more and more internet innovators into different topics that we think are some of the key elements for the development of internet. This slide illustrates this a bit. As you can see here on the top left are the 3 first projects, topics that are currently starting, where the open calls are actually opening now. And the next level here we see the ones where we are now looking for consortia for the intermediaries, and we are working on the topics, the 3 next topics that will come next year. And I think there will be a strong inclusion of topics around blockchain, the distributed ledger technologies, maybe also how we are considering the impact of misinformation and so on happening on the internet. So those topics are under definition for the moment, but as you can see, there is kind of a continuous launch of new intermediaries, attraction of new intermediaries, which will then do the open calls. So we will have a lot of these intermediaries on one side, but certainly many innovators. This is what we hope, to reach out and get these innovators. And we really think that in the context of this, as I showed earlier, with all these areas which we think contribute to internet, we need on one side the researchers that are looking in a horizontal way across AI to big data to inclusion and so on. So on one side we need the researchers in all those areas to think horizontally across these areas. And in addition, we are trying to attract with these projects the internet innovators which are outside those areas. And we want these 2 communities then, and that's a challenge for us, to ensure that they are working together in how internet evolves. At the bottom of this slide, you see also that we have some support actions. So they have started now, and there is in particular one which will help with all the outreach. So how we are presented in an improved way on our ngi.eu webpage, but also other activities which, like this workshop here in Sweden, we have similar workshops happening across Europe, and also other activities. So we are trying to engage in this way. And there is also this EU-US activities, so we have some exchanges with them, and I have a slide at the end which gives a little bit of a view on that as well. But as you can see, all this is happening, and the Horizon Europe is going to start at some point, where we also see this as a big intervention area. So before I give the word over to Rebecca, we have this ICT 31, which is like a sister initiative. We are working together with the US. We this year started 2 projects, selected 2 projects. One is a think tank that will organize a bit of support to activities relating to this area. But we're also having a project with the fellowship program. So they are now making calls and providing fellowships for European researchers to go to the US for a few months, and then of course come back here and continue their work. But there is currently a call open, and again here in the same way as we do the cascade funding in different topics that I presented earlier, here we're also looking for a similar approach. So together with the Americans, we want intermediary project that are looking for researchers that will use then the emerging topics and that are having in the American sister program, if you could say so. They also have this Tomorrow's Internet. And we want them to use the experimental platforms which have been developed in the context of our joint activities in FIRE. And here as well is cascade funding, and we are looking here for the consortia which will operate as intermediaries. So to conclude, if we see this internet evolution as I started with it, we really think that the next step here is to have this strong focus on the human-centric internet, to see how we evolve, how we can go in that direction. And NGI is really the tool we see to move in that direction. So the takeaways really from this, from my side, is that we see that the internet is really changing rapidly, And we want to interact and ensure that these changes in an effective way really want to shape it in the direction that we want along the core values that we see. NGI is ambitious. We have this significant joint effort that involve really all the researchers that are in this area. And we envision really the human-centric approach to embed the core values that we consider important here, such as mentioned earlier, this privacy, trust, security, but also dimensions like the decentralization, the resilience, and sustainability. So with these words, I'd like to thank you for listening here in the room and also on the web. I hope you have been many there as well and that you've been able to follow this. And indeed, please join on this exciting journey. Thank you. I suppose now I hand over to you, Rebecca. Okay, we have time, Rebecca says, for a...
Could you please send the presentation?
Of course, I will ask Johan and Rebecca to... will have a copy so they can share it with you. I don't know if you put it on the website or if you... how you do this. And then there was a question in the front.
I was thinking about the... Oh, sorry. Okay, so I'm Henrik here. I was thinking about the size of the projects that the intermediaries need to take care of. They said 50 to 200,000 euros, which is not a lot of money. And I just wonder what kind of projects are they actually looking for that these intermediaries will look after.
Yeah. I think if you allow me, if Rebecca can go through her presentation first, and then we come back to your question, because I think you maybe provide some elements, Rebecca, and then we should certainly come back if it's not. I think it will be clarified, and if we can discuss it afterward, it's better when she has provided some more. But in a short way, each one of these intermediary projects that are selected then for an area, they define some of those elements within that project already. So that's why we're saying from the Commission side, typically it's 50 to 200K for 9 to 12 months, but we are leaving it up to each proposal of each one of these intermediaries to say a bit more specifically in relation to the area that they see, that they work on, and what they see is necessary. But Rebecca, maybe you say a few words on it as well, and then we can speak about it again.
Sorry, because I have a background from another EU organization that is called EIT Digital, and we had rather small and short projects, one-year projects. Although the funding was a bit larger than what you had indicated here. And you can't do a lot of work, actually. Just some experience that I got. Yeah. It's very difficult to do anything that other than just finalizing. In order, if this is going to be more of innovation activity, which I assume, rather than R&I, you don't have a lot of funding actually to complete and a product launch, etc. What is expected? Yeah. That's why I was asking this. So it seemed to be not enough of funding in order to actually really create something.
Yeah. Okay, we will have to see. We are launching the first projects now, so indeed we will have to see how this evolves and how each project are maybe then adapting what they are asking for. Okay, but Rebecca, if I leave the word to you, and then you are going to take this over, or? Okay.
So it's online, yeah. Okay, so thank you for that presentation. I'm Rebecca Steinert. Most of you know me as the Swedish National Contact Point. And today we're going to continue where we left off from the previous workshop, because since then there are a lot of stuff that has happened since then. So finally we can go and get a little bit more concrete information on how we actually get started and getting involved in this. initiative. So, just to set the context and the background a little bit, with a slightly different perspective, I think that we all agree on that internet is really the support system today of the entire society, and it is truly a key enabler for digitalization. And that means that internet as such has to be able to support a lot of digitalization functions that ranges from everything that we know as smart cities and intelligent transportation, big data processing, AI, and so on, all the way to cryptocurrencies and such things. And that also have altogether an implication, several implications on privacy and trust matters that boils down to the individual modern internet user. And if we look at things from the birth of internet, things look completely different nowadays, because internet from the beginning was basically a distributed system designed to ship packets from one end to the other, and the daily life of that internet user, so to speak, the early internet users looked much simpler than today. The modern internet user today faces many more challenges that has to do typically with much more complicated security issues, data management issues, the notion of digital footprints, the right to use services anonymously, e-identification, and so on and so on. And then we have a little bit of legislation aspects as well. So altogether, we sort of reached a point now where we actually need to consider to redesign the internet, not only from an infrastructure level, but also on an application level. And that's why the EU now initiated, as part of that change, the EU initiated the Next Generation Internet Initiative, and all these calls that Ragnar just showed, and in particular this Horizon 2020 ICT 24, the Next Generation Internet and Open Internet Initiative, that is sort of bridging the gaps technically across all the other NGI topics like AI, IoT, and big data, and so on. So, before Horizon 2020 expires, there will be 3 rounds of this particular call. One has already closed, and we will talk much about the outcome of that call. The reason why you are all here is because you're probably interested in applying within the second round, which is open until the 28th of March. So there is a lot more to read about this, for example, at the formal available call text. This call is sort of implemented in terms of cascade funding, which Ragnar explained what that is. Just to refresh your minds a little bit, it means basically that as a consortium, when you apply to the EU, if you get your project approved, you will be acting as an intermediary organization, and you will be responsible for handing out and distributing 80% of the funding that you get to small third-party projects. And what you can, all those projects that you get at the consortium level is basically targeting one subtopic each. And those subtopics are updated per round, as we have described. Okay, so what is typical for an intermediary and what is typical for a third-party organization? Basically, the consortium has to be led and consist of organizations with a good track record of having the experience, the capabilities to distribute this type of funding with administrative processes and so on. Typical for a third-party organization is it can be an individual without a legal entity. It can be an SME, it can be an individual researcher, or a group of different people with different backgrounds that form an application team. But the key here is that the third-party organization is the one that gets the job done. Okay, so finally to the part that I know that you and everybody else have been waiting for. This is this part where we actually go into sharing some information that we got, or basically everything that we know so far from the outcome of round 1. So this is the part where we, based on the first round and the outcome and the approved projects that are now up and running, look at who got that funding, what does the consortium look like, who are the participants, and how have they set up their project and their project vision and their organization around open calls. So this is what we're going to look at now. All right, so what we have observed here is that those projects that got funded are driven by coordinator organizations that have a typical foundation profile. So it is foundations or organizations, incubator organizations that are used to setting up open calls and follow up on smaller short-term projects, for sure. And those projects are very much based on advisory boards and review committees with independent experts representing business, research, development, and developers to ensure that the angle of the particular subtopic that is targeted in a certain project is clarified in terms of technical challenges that are important to address, as well as technical requirements on the expected technical results that will come out from the open calls, followed up with review committees, also usually normally independent experts that follow up on the quality of the results, ensuring that all the requirements are fulfilled. The observed size varies quite a bit, a little bit to my surprise, but it ranges from the minimum requirements of having at least 3 organizations representing 3 different member states, all the way up to 13 partners. So, so everything is possible here. For those of you that are acquainted with EU projects in general, you will find yourself quite comfortable because the overall project setup is very similar to a typical RIA project. So you have work packages, tasks, deliverables, and milestones, everything that is normally there. The project proposal. Now, first disclaimer, I have not seen a project proposal from Horizon 2020 ICT 24, but this is what I have picked up, the bits and pieces of information in combination with a little bit of common sense. So typically, what you would do when you describe this type of project is that you emphasize, of course, exactly what I said, based on the advisory board and expertise that you have. What are the challenges, the most important challenges and the real problem that you're solving within the specified subtopic that you're addressing? And what are the technical requirements on the results? And because this is cascade funding and you as a consortium will distribute a substantial part of the funding that you get, you have to explain very much in detail how you intend to administrate the open calls. So how many calls per year, how many phases, how much, what's the maximum amount that a third-party team or organization can get, how long is the duration of the third-party projects, how do you follow up on the results and ensure that there is sufficient quality. What does the third-party application actually look like? Is it a web form or is it a couple of pages of written text? It's entirely up to you. And of course, how you intend to evaluate the result. Who will be in your expert group and how do you manage that? Of course, as in all these calls, you have to explain what is the expected impact of this effort. So what is it that you're going to achieve, and how can you achieve it? Along with the budget specification of the partner effort, because recall that 20% of the funding that you get will cover your administrative costs. So that's how you explain how that funding will be divided per partner and relative to their effort. One thing that I also picked up is that no matter how good you think that you are, it's always good to have a letter of recommendation and documentation of excellence to just back up every claim that you have for being able and capable of distributing this quite large amount of funding. Okay, so we have some project finance and legal, because one thing that I get quite often is the question: how is what does the payment process actually look like? Do we get funding in advance? Do we get funding throughout the project, or do we get funded after the project has ended and we have reported satisfactory results? And as always, in these types of projects, you actually get funding. You get a fairly balanced flow of funding throughout the entire project. So you get 85% basically in advance per year. 15% is kept by the EC until you have reported satisfactory results. So if you have a 3-year project and you have equal and balanced flow, then you get 1/3 of the funding, but 85% of that then, per year. So no worries about that. Other than that, when it comes to legal, it's usual Horizon 2020 and RIA rules that apply. So you can read the call text and go and look a little bit further in the general annexes and other documents. So no deviations there. But when it comes to cascade funding, you as a consortium set up the agreements with the third-party organizations. So that's how you effectively convey the expectations on the actual result that comes out from the third-party projects. So that's what you are responsible for formalizing. But there are guidelines how you do this. So look in the call text and look in the general annexes. Okay, so now we get to the part where we can talk a little bit about the actual funded projects. So in this round, this very first round, 4 projects actually got funded. And the reason for that is that more funding was found. So each of these projects got around 7 million euros, I believe. And the first observation we can make here is exactly that the first name here, NLNet and Funding Box and FE Centers, those are exactly the coordination. They have the profile for coordinating this kind of projects. So they are used to writing this type of proposals, and they are used to administrating this type of funding to smaller projects. And also, as we see, they are addressing at least one of the 3 topics that was announced in the first round. Okay, so instead of going through each and one of the projects, because this is very recent information, I think it's better to just go through the average NGI project as I have analyzed them. So, and together with some common denominators on how they actually approach things in practice. So what we can expect here is that there will be at least 1 call, open call, per year. In the NLNet case, they will have many more calls per year, typically with a open call period of 2 months. Exactly what is relevant for you depends on which project that you intend to contribute to, of course. There are also somewhat different expectations on the typical third-party applicant. In some cases, it's totally okay to be 1 individual, one individual researcher. In other cases, there are requirements on forming teams with members representing research, developers, and business persons.
Yeah, that's exactly the question. Is it innovation action or is it a research action?
Okay, so the question was, is it a research action or an innovation action? My view of this is that it is mainly an innovation action, but with heavy support from research. Right, so that's my short and crisp answer. All right. The funding process is implemented a little bit differently from project to project, but either there are open calls continuously, more or less, until the funding is up, or the funding is distributed in different phases. So typically from the idea phase to the implementation phase to putting a product to the market phase. So it looks a little bit different depending on which project you have, but what is notable here is that the aggregated total sum that a third-party organization or team can get is 200K. It says in the call text that it is possible to stretch that number a little bit, but in these cases, this hasn't been done yet. So everybody followed exactly the numbers and project durations as advised in the actual call text. So let's see how that looks like in the next round. But this is what it looks like. When it comes to administrative reporting, this is designed in general to make life much easier for the third-party organizations. So not much administrative reporting regarding expense reports and such things are expected. The focus is mainly on, did you get the job done? And did you get the job done in a good way and according to the expectations? Well, basically you have nothing to worry about. So that's the focus. Exactly how you used that funding and your expenses is not relevant. So that should make life much easier, right? If you get funded and if your idea is sufficiently good, there is a good chance that you can attract additional funding by the end of the project. Then it is very likely that you can expect to get technical coaching, advices, and business mentoring, of course, and everything that you need to accelerate your idea. And of course, the expected output, as far as I've heard, is mainly focused on software, open software. It's an open internet initiative. Or products that could be accelerated on the market with additional support. So there are a little bit different approaches and views on how to take these results further. This is the main information page. It's the main NDI channel. It's ndi.eu. We've been waiting for months, me and my NDI colleagues, for getting this magic button. You press open calls and it will guide you to information directly to one of the fourth projects that are currently up and running. And I think that now all the projects are actually up and running since at least 1st of December. And there are already open calls that are closing 1st of February. It relates to the NDI Zero and the NDI Zero projects. So if you're curious, you can go in there and see how it looks like. Now, regardless of whether you will make a consortium or whether you will contribute in terms of a third-party team in one of these open calls, it's very good to make yourself visible on the NDI map. It's also a tool for finding good, relevant collaborators, so please take a look. There are more organizations added as time goes, so if you haven't visited this one for a while, please do. And when in doubt, you can always contact me, always. I'm the Swedish National Contact Point, of course, so if you are watching online and you are not from Sweden, you can always contact your own national contact point, but if you don't have one or you don't know who that is, you can always contact me. All right, so that's basically what I had to say today. And before we wrap this session up, Johan will say a few words, but before that, I want to thank you for listening and thank you for watching.
Okay, thank you very much, Rebecca, and also thank you very much, Ragnar, for explaining the program and the status where we are right now. So with that, I will just sort of conclude the webcast and the open session, and we will break for a short coffee break. So those who are here physically, you have coffee and water and saffransbullar outside. And then we will convene in here again at 11 o'clock for further discussions and bilateral questions and discussions regarding how to continue. The webcast will be available on Vinnova's YouTube channel, and also the presentations will be available in the calendar event on our webpage shortly after the event, so you can go back. And of course, as Rebecca said, contact our NGI national contact person or contact us at Vinnova if you have questions.
I have questions to the speaker, both of them. You know, it's a traditional that we always is behind of the development. For example, about 30 years ago, Ericsson, the biggest telco in the world, told about internet, the American net. And I think we continue in the same way. If you study the research center in the United States, for example, Silicon Valley, nobody talk about next generation internet, but all talk about blockchain, about applied AI, artificial intelligence. And why we see just so narrow next generation internet? Because you talk about networking. Networking is not the big issue. Data is a big issue. Thank you.
All right. This one I can answer. So I think there is a little bit of misconception, because it is exactly this narrow scope that we are trying to address by the next generation internet. It should not be mixed up with infrastructure. On the contrary, what we're trying to do here is to cover the gaps that are needed to make digitalization work. And part of that is, of course, to include technologies for, or at least explore, distributed ledger technologies and blockchain and everything that can make life easier for the modern internet user, and also help implement a full societal digitalization that actually works with respect to everything from e-identification to how we handle individual data in transportation, for example. So it's much bigger, but we have to start somewhere. So that's why there are prioritized subtopics per round that are focused on mainly privacy and trust. In FP9, and this I didn't mention because I mentioned it in the last workshop, there will be a much more merged focus, so to say, that will include both infrastructure and application. All right.
Okay, many thanks for that further clarification. So, but with that, I close the open webcast and the seminar, and we have coffee outside. So thank you very much.